The Architecture of Anarchy. The Silk Road Saga. The story of the Silk Road is not merely a crime thriller. It is the definitive origin story of our modern digital age. It is a narrative about the collision between radical human ambition and the immovable structures of state power. To understand the Silk Road, one must first understand the man who built it, Ross Ulbricht. Ross was not a stereotypical criminal. He was an Eagle Scout, a brilliant student, and a deeply committed libertarian who believed that the government's interference in the free market was a fundamental moral wrong. In his early 20s, he began to dream of a space where the individual could trade, communicate, and live without the invisible shackles of regulation, surveillance, or moral judgment. He wanted to build an economic system that was truly sovereign, a place where the only laws were those of nature and mathematics. In 2011, this vision manifested as the Silk Road. It was a masterpiece of digital architecture. By leveraging the Tor network, which bounced traffic through anonymous nodes across the globe, Ulbricht created a marketplace that was effectively invisible to traditional law enforcement. But Tor was only half the solution. The missing piece was money. Without a currency that could move across borders without passing through a bank, an anonymous market was impossible. Then came Bitcoin. To Ulbricht, Bitcoin was not just an asset. It was the lifeblood of his digital frontier. When the site launched, it was a ghost town. But within months, it exploded. It became the world's first darknet market, a decentralized bazaar where buyers and sellers from every corner of the planet met in total anonymity. Under the moniker Dread Pirate Roberts, Ulbricht acted as the benevolent overseer of this empire. He built an ecosystem based on trust. He introduced an escrow system where the platform held the buyer's payment until the goods were verified, a feature that eliminated fraud and made the marketplace surprisingly reliable. For the first time in human history, an illegal transaction could be as convenient as buying a book on Amazon. As the Silk Road grew, so did the friction between Ulbricht's idealism and the reality of the business. The site became a clearinghouse for items that the state had deemed prohibited: drugs, forged documents, and restricted goods. As the revenue ballooned into hundreds of millions of dollars, the attention of the state became inevitable. The FBI, the DEA, and the Department of Homeland Security began a desperate, years-long hunt for the entity behind the moniker. They were fighting a ghost. They had no physical targets to hit, no offices to raid, and no clear jurisdiction to claim. The investigation became a high-stakes, multi-agency saga of digital detective work. They infiltrated forums, engaged in complex stings, and spent millions of dollars on cyber-analysis, trying to de-anonymize the traffic flowing to and from the hidden servers. Ulbricht, however, began to change. The pressure of running a global, multi-billion-dollar empire alone, while living in plain sight, started to take its toll. The Dread Pirate Roberts persona became increasingly cold, focused on protecting the empire at any cost. Reports surfaced of Ulbricht allegedly commissioning hits to protect his anonymity, allegations he would later contest in court. The idealistic boy who wanted to liberate humanity was slowly being consumed by the machinery he had built. The downfall of the Silk Road was not a failure of technology. The encryption did not break. The servers were not hacked. The Bitcoin protocol remained as robust as ever. The collapse was entirely, tragically human. In their search, federal agents found a faint, forgotten connection. A post on a public forum, made years prior, which linked an email address containing Ross Ulbricht's name to the very first mention of the Silk Road. It was a thread so thin that it seemed invisible, but it was enough to pull on. They tracked him to San Francisco. They mapped his patterns. They realized the man they were hunting was not a phantom. He was a guy who liked to work in his local public library. On October 2, 2013, the hunt ended in the Glen Park Library. Agents didn't need a SWAT team. They needed a distraction. As Ross was focused on his screen, logged into the Silk Road administrative panel as the Dread Pirate Roberts, agents approached him, staged a lover's quarrel to create a scene, and grabbed his laptop before he could execute a script to encrypt or wipe the hard drive. In that single, quiet moment in a library, the largest criminal marketplace in history ceased to exist. Ross Ulbricht's trial became a global spectacle. He was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 40 years, without the possibility of parole. To the state, he was a dangerous architect of crime. To his supporters, he was a victim of an overreaching legal system, a man who dared to challenge the state's monopoly on commerce and privacy. The legacy of the Silk Road is a haunting cautionary tale. It proved that, in the digital era, the tools of absolute liberty are also the tools of absolute risk. Ross proved that technology can build a world beyond the reach of any government, but he also proved that we remain bound by our own human fallibility. He built a digital fortress, but he left the door open. Today, the Silk Road serves as the foundational myth of the crypto economy. It showed the world the true power of decentralized finance and anonymous networks. It forced every government on Earth to reckon with the reality that the old world of borders and banking was fading away, replaced by a new, borderless reality. Was Ross Ulbricht a pioneer of the future, or a warning from the past? That is the question that remains unresolved. But one thing is certain. After the Silk Road, the internet was never the same again. We entered an era where privacy, finance, and freedom are no longer granted by institutions. They are secured by code. And as Ross Ulbricht learned too late, while code can be perfect, the hands that type it never will be.